Welcome to Crotoni Entertainment. I'm Chris.
And I'm Bree.
And we got another new game.
Because we have no self-control.
Because we have no self-control. Anyway, we're going to paint Spider-Man from Marvel Crisis Protocol today. And it's all going to begin by priming him in our Krylon 2X matte gray matte perfect gray varnish, or not varnish, spray paint. This is off to a good start, guys.
Yep.
And
we're going blue.
We're doing a couple new things with this video series. This is going to be a brand new video series on Marvel Crisis Protocol. We have the core box plus a couple additional models, and I think we're going to start doing weekly videos on these figures as well. So this will take us for a while. So this is going to probably preview on Wednesdays, because Wednesday is New Comic Book Day in the U.S.
Yes, it is.
So we're starting with a mid-tone blue, and we're just painting all of Spider-Man that should be blue, which would be his pants and kind of part of his shirt area there. You'll notice I didn't make a big fuss about what blue it is. It is Vallejo Blue Magic. It doesn't actually matter, is why I'm not making a big fuss out of it. Pick any mid-tone blue you like that you think is going to be appropriate for Spider-Man. Then we're going to go into a Vallejo model color Carmine Red. What you may notice is, if you watch any of our Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid videos, I'm not using any Citadel paints this time.
Yep.
So this is my new thing. It's an excuse to buy a new line of paints, which I'm sure is going to upset Bree.
Yeah, because I'm so good at saying no, Chris.
Because that comes out of family budget and everything.
Don't stop, come back.
But anyway, we're using all Vallejo paints for our Marvel series, only because I'm trying to make a separation from Citadel paints. I don't need Citadel paint as my primary paint anymore. I just don't. I'm not going to get into the reason why. But for this new adventure, we're going to use a new line of paint. So just like we do with the blue, we're painting everything on Spider-Man that should be red, and we're doing it relatively carefully. And you see that we're actually leaving some spots that gray, kind of where the belt meets the pants and around the boots. We're going to come back to that all later in a little bit, because the other challenge we're doing is I'm trying a completely new style of painting. I've never painted a miniature like this before. We're doing Spider-Man in a comic book style.
Yeah.
We want our Marvel Crisis Protocol figs to look like they came off the pages of a comic book. And we're starting with Spider-Man because he is our son's favorite.
Yes, he is.
I think we both have a special place in our heart for Spider-Man too. But
yeah,
he's definitely Jules's favorite character.
Yeah.
So we're painting his lenses with this Glacier Ice, or Glacier Grey, whatever Vallejo calls it here. It's just a near white gray to give a little depth to the white that we're going to tap into. And then we've got this Parasite Brown from Game Color, and we're going to actually paint the I-beam that Spider-Man is standing on this. Now, the other thing I'm trying to avoid, because we're doing a comic book style, is I'm trying to avoid true metallic colors.
Yeah, because of course in comic books there are no metallics. Everything is a gray or a beige or something like that to represent.
Now, the real test of that, of course, is going to be when I paint somebody like Ultron. But for Spider-Man, it's easy enough to paint this I-beam, this kind of brown shade. We've seen, in comics and movies, and some of you possibly in real life, I-beams that have a reddish tint to them or a brownish tint to them. So we're making this work. I think this style of painting, even though it's going to look complicated, fits in well to the Crotoni Entertainment philosophy of the Everyman paint job. If you followed our Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid video series, you know that we do in what we call the Everyman paint job. It's going to look good from 3 feet away or be 3 foot fabulous. I forget where I heard that originally, but it's a phrase that stuck with me for the last 20 years. And this is something anybody can actually do with a little bit of patience. We're not going to do any techniques that are off the wall difficult.
Yeah.
And this comic book style, as you're going to see when we get into the shading and the highlighting, I think you're really going to see fits that bill, because you're not highlighting every raised area. You're not shading every nook and cranny in a natural fashion.
Right.
You're doing a much more stylized approach that I actually had a lot of fun painting. I was a big fan of this. So like I said, this is going to be our new Wednesday series. Marvel Crisis Protocol. Join us every week. Like and subscribe for more content. Hit the bell for notification. Got to say that to please the algorithm while we're pulling up kind of our next look here. And the next thing we did is look at the base. And this is my preview for you. I'm using a very, very light Vallejo Gray. I hate it.
You hate it?
I hate it. I was just doing this light gray on the actual rubble pile.
Yeah.
That the the I-beam is kind of situated into.
Mm-hmm.
And it dried very, very overly light gray. I didn't like it. I didn't care for it. We're going to actually paint over it in just a minute. But I thought it was kind of valuable to leave the visual of it on here so you can kind of see just kind of how I'm approaching it. You see, I'm kind of being a little bit messy, but every time I get close to an area that touches another area, another color, I slow down a little bit, just because I want to outline it right. Now, I did use this darker gray. They call it neutral gray through Vallejo. And this I decided I was going to do the sidewalk with. So it's going to be a very dark sidewalk. And I did some observing of this technique, looked at some photos of this technique before I decided to try it myself, and looked at some digital pages of Spider-Man comics and whatnot before I decided to try this. And one thing that you'll notice in other people who do this technique, and you'll see in comics themselves, is there's not as much detail in the backgrounds as there are in the characters. If you're a comic reader, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yep. There's plenty of times in old Spider-Man comics where if it's sufficiently zoomed out enough, they don't even draw the webbing on Spider-Man's costume. He's just red and blue.
Oh, yeah.
So we're not going to do anything overly complex with this basing. This is going to be the predominant color for this sidewalk. And I also decided at about this point to go back and paint over this rubble pile, because look at that drastic difference in those grays.
Yeah, that is significant.
That's too much for me. I'm not a fan of it. So I just went right over that rubble pile, and that's the beauty of this. Now, these Vallejo paints I'm a big fan of. You can do the same technique with Citadel Paints. You can do it with Army Painter paints. You can do it with any brand of paint you want. But I've long said that I think Vallejo makes the best quality paint.
Yeah.
It's not as available. Not every hobby store on the planet carries Vallejo. We happen to live relatively close enough to one that carries pretty much their whole line.
Yeah.
So I have lots of color options here, but I'm basically starting from scratch. I think I only had 5 or 6 Vallejo colors before I started this project. So I picked most of these up just to do
even
this
including
Spider-Man.
the ones I had squirreled away?
Something like that. So anyway, we've got this Vallejo model color Andrea blue, and again, it doesn't matter. Just take a lighter blue than the midtone that you did. You don't have to do the exact same colors. And we're going to highlight Spider-Man, but rather than following every contour on the model, like I alluded to, we're targeting the higher parts of the mini.
Right.
Because generally in comic book shading, you don't see shading everywhere you'd see shading on a model. You see it on kind of the upper part. So we're painting the top of the knee, we're painting the thigh, we're painting some of that spider butt. And you see we're leaving plenty of the mid-tone blue visible as well. And there's going to be very little of this blue actually going on the shirt. So there's not really anything I can do to tell you on where to put this highlight other than pretend you're looking at a comic book page and kind of just put it on the higher areas, leave your darker a little bit lower. You're not going for realism here.
Right.
You're going for a very, very stylized look. So you see I just kind of did it on the top where the arms are exposed there. I did a little bit on the side of the stomach there, but just a dab, as you can see.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how we situate our Spider-Man. For his blue. And we're pretty much done with the blue at this point. That's why I think this fits to the everyman style.
Yeah, you don't need a lot of colors to achieve this look.
Correct. There's actually a kind of an old philosophy, and I can't believe I didn't show the red, but basically we're jumping into a Vallejo red now. That's just a little bit brighter than the red we used before. And that's all you're going for. It's just like a shade brighter. Nothing fancy, nothing crazy. And again, I'm targeting the top. So Spider-Man has a lot of red up high. He's got the top of his head. He's got his shoulders. His chest kind of pokes out a little bit, so you want to get the top of that around the spider emblem. See, I'm just kind of tapping the fingers. I'm not following like the knuckles. I'm not following the musculature. Right. I'm just hitting these high areas. And I don't know how to emphasize that anymore. That's all we're targeting. We're not being discriminate here.
Right. And well, this is not it really is the whole thing. This is not realistic. This is comic book. This is that bright. And especially, the cool part is that I enjoyed about this is almost more like the kind of the look of the comic books that we grew up with in that 80s to 90s transition, where it was bright colors to punch you in the face.
Well, see, that's the other thing about the comic book philosophy. I don't remember who said this, and I've heard it repeated by a number of people. But I remember hearing years ago by a comic book, one of the comic book legends out there, that the kind of philosophy of the comic book hero, especially the ones that started in the 40s, 50s, and 60s and led into today, is the 4-color hero.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Spider-Man is. He's got blue, he's got red, they're both pretty bright, he's got black, and he's got white on him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the white on Spider-Man is really only noticeable because he has those large eyepieces. And that's all we've got is this 4-color motif. You think about the other characters in the Marvel Crisis box. Captain America is going to be red, white, blue, and some black lining, basically. You see a little bit of flesh, not much. Some other Marvel characters they make, Doc Ock, that's your green, your yellow, your gray, or your silver, and your flesh color.
Yep.
Those are your primaries. So now we're going to fill in the eye lenses with some white. Again, any white you like. I'm using the Vallejo Dead White.
This is one of my favorite whites.
You can skip over to DC, and they use the same philosophy. Superman has basically a skin color, a blue, a red, and a yellow. The yellow is a very small amount.
Yep.
You look at Batman. Batman of the 60s, 70s, and 80s had blue that was shaded black, gray, and yellow.
Yeah.
This is the philosophy of these superheroes. You have this 4-color concept. And Bria's coughing in the background. She's just finishing up that cold that kind of put us out of action for a lot of last week.
Yeah.
But that's what you're going for. You're going for this 4-color. Now, here's the really fun part. I got an acrylic ink. This one's from Liquitex. I don't know enough about acrylic inks to tell you what brands to use, but I got an acrylic ink and a very, very thin brush. And this is the hardest part. And I had some trouble kind of keeping it focused and whatnot because this model is smaller and my lights were kind of bright. But basically now you are blacklining everything. So this very, very thin brush. I started on the base and trying to find a good position where you can actually see what I'm doing here. And all these recessed areas of the base, these cracks in the concrete, the separation of the panels, I'm doing in black. This is our shading.
And this is it.
Now, there are large flat areas. Well, what do you see in comic books on large flat areas, especially in the 80s and 90s?
Just little.
You see these stylized black lines.
Yeah.
So we've got I just put stylized black lines, honestly, wherever I felt like. I'm sure there's a better way to do this. I'm sure there's a theory behind how they should be placed. They're a little all over the place on the base. They're a little better on Spider-Man himself, as you kind of see that. But that rubble pile, to separate it from the sidewalk, I black lined the outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
I black lined some individual pieces of rubble to kind of make them pop out more. And I did nothing special here. There's no dry brushes, washes, multiple shades, anything to make this base pop other than this black lining to try to make it look like a drawing, or to, if you didn't grow up in the 90s like we did, if you're not familiar with this style of comic book look, you could also say it has almost a bit of shell shading sort of visual like you would see in this is an older game at this point. The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
Or in slightly newer games, but still kind of dated, several years old at this point, like the Borderlands series did heavy cell shading. I'm not great at making video game analogies because I'm realizing that most of the video games I like are aging rapidly.
I mean, Skyrim just put out a what year anniversary?
Oh, Skyrim is 99 years old. That's...
They've been playing Skyrim since the dawn of time.
But Skyrim has that realistic look, and that's what I did for some of our Batman minis. But I wanted this stylized look because this is a game that's just honestly, this is a goofy game.
Oh, it's so gloriously goofy.
We played Batman Miniatures first edition. We didn't really play second edition. I think they're on third edition now.
Yeah.
But we haven't played much. We haven't played much since the first edition there. But that game was gritty, and it was all about resource management. It was strategic because you had to place tokens, and those tokens would dictate how many times you could attack. But you could only have a maximum number for a certain character. This game, however, all your characters can kind of do all their stuff. And the power limitation of this game does not really hold you back because it's very easy to generate power.
Yes.
In this game, from what we've discovered so far, we only played a couple of games.
Yeah.
But this is it's definitely not as strategic as Batman. It's not as deep in that sense, but it is a lot more insane. I mean, we were throwing vehicles at each other, and it was not. By the way, I think we were doing the vehicle throwing wrong. I'll show you that later. We'll do that off camera.
Oh, good. So you mean that I wouldn't wouldn't have taken a Prius to the face?
No, he would have actually.
Okay.
But the way we were doing it, so on this black ink, I'm also doing a hard black shading.
Right, all around where things meet.
Well, this is underneath,
not
the black line, the hard black shading. The entire underside of this piece of I-beam is solid black. So I tried doing some patterns on the I-beam here with the black. You'll see later I didn't like them and I painted over them. But basically, again, drawing in these lines on the I-beam to kind of make it look, just kind of give it texture.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, no,
I don't like what I did on the front here. That's going to go away in a minute. That didn't turn out well. I never tried this before. I wasn't a fan of what happened. But this hard black shading, you'll see it like right there, like Spider-Man's ankle. I did a big chunk of black there. I'm doing it all under his legs. There's going to be some under his arms because that's the stuff on the page you're never going to see.
Yeah.
That's that artificial shadow that you see drawn in
right.
on the pages.
You kind of see a lot of this in Into the Spider-Verse.
Yes, you see a little bit of that there, and any cartoon really will do the similar thing. So you see the whole underside of his arm. I'm doing with this black ink.
Yep.
Now the black ink is very glossy. The Vallejo paints actually can come off a little glossy. I always seal these with a matte varnish at the end, and it makes it unglossy. Makes it more matte. So right here again, there's that Spider-Man thigh muscle. Spider-Man is all knees and elbows, so he's going to have these epic thigh muscles.
Poor Spider-Man never grew out of being an awkward teenage boy.
That's kind of the allegory of Spider-Man. And then I'm not going to go over all of the webbing because this did take a fair amount of time. But basically, I'm just drawing in the webbing. What's nice on this miniature is it has kind of little recesses where the webbing on his costume is. So I just kind of followed those. And it basically did the work for me, and all it took was some patience. I'm not going to show you the whole thing because this video would get way too long. I probably spent an hour just doing the webbing.
Right.
If you don't want to do it, and you just want to do like the black spider, nobody would blame you for skipping the webbing.
No, nobody would blame you at all.
But it looks really, really cool when you do it because that's what it comes out looking like. And you see all those marks I put on the elbows and the thighs and whatnot. On Spider-Man, I know the design philosophy for the Sam Raimi movie was that Spider-Man is all elbows and knees. That's how Spider-Man fights and lands because he's more like a spider than a person. And then finally, I picked this Vallejo. It's called dark blue, but I'm sorry, this is not the dark blue. I think the hex purple or whatever it's called. To do something around the rim of his base that wasn't a gray or a black or something neutral. I wanted to pop a color. It's a comic book character.
One of the colors that we were using for like Heroes of the Grid or one of those.
Yeah, and I kind of want to do a good guy, bad guy sort of thing because you can put both on the same team. And good guys usually like blue or green. Bad guys usually like red. Let's do a purple. It mixes them together. I kind of like the way it panned out. It makes a nice little accent for him. And then we have him. There's Spider-Man, first episode of Marvel Crisis Paintocol. Join us next week for another one. Hit that bell button for notifications. Like and subscribe for more content. And we'll see you next time, guys.
I'm not okay with Paintocol, but bye!